Hypocrisy.
Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to Lawsplaining the Interwebs. I am your host, Nick Recato of Recato Law, a small law firm in central Minnesota. Obscenely and utterly late. Sorry about that. Oh my God. Sometimes things come up at the last second and it doesn't matter to you guys, but that's, well, whatever. My apologies for that. I tried to account for a little extra time I would need and did a terrible job. That's, that's the kind of quality you can grow to know and expect from Recato Law. Anyway, so I have a topic we're going to get pretty much right into tonight. We're going to pretty much right into this topic and go. It's something I've been observing lately, and I really want to just kind of start talking through it with a couple different articles and ideas. And as we do that, just really go on an exploration of some concepts surrounding this idea of an upcoming or ongoing rebellion. The rebellion fueled and propelled by the myth of right-wing extremism. That is, that's the mantra of the day. I don't know if you guys have been seeing it the way I have, but I have seen quite a bit of talk about right-wing extremism. I'm seeing more and more references to the Civil War and comparisons to the Civil War than I remember seeing in a long time. And I mean in the open. Obviously, I've seen comparisons to the Civil War going back at least really since midway through the Obama administration. This idea kind of crept up in hushed talks and private, not secret circles about where people would discuss politics and discuss the ongoing and growing divide between the right and the left, Republicans and Democrats. But this is at a time which seemed so polarized, and by today's comparison seems like nothing. But I would, of course, see references to a civil war. What happens? What's it look like? I've talked about them. I've talked about the concept of a modern civil war, the differences between it, always as a kind of for me, an exercise and a thought experiment, but also a tempering of people calling towards that idea. The idea of a split in the Union and the comparisons to the 1860s, and what that would look like today, they're so much different. Our world works differently. Our allegiances are not divided geographically in the same way. So I've certainly talked about it. I've heard about it. But what I'm seeing lately, and really in the past couple of weeks, is this creeping up of civil war into mainstream media commentary and political commentary on major legacy networks. We saw it with Nikki Haley, right? Nikki Haley was asked about the Civil War. Today, Joe Biden hearkened back, or maybe yesterday, one of those two. Joe Biden hearkened back to Abraham Lincoln talking about the Civil War, talking about the divide in the country, and specifically talking about quote unquote election deniers as the Southerners resisting the benevolent North, and effectively stating that election denial of 2020 was the modern Confederacy, which is a shocking claim and a shocking allegation. The comparisons don't even come close. And yet we see the media reaching into this idea, the description of the January 6th protesters as insurrectionists and treasonous. The suggestion of Republican political candidates being treasonous or insurrectionists. The suggestion of Republican senators and congressmen on January 6th being insurrectionists as well. The idea that Donald Trump himself, the number one political enemy of Joe Biden, the person who peacefully transitioned power to Joe Biden and is only campaigning under the regular election system to return to the White House, being treated as if he is committing the greatest offense to American stability of anyone in recent memory. It's kind of a troubling trend that I'm noticing, and I'm thinking we're going to see more of it and more of it and more of it going into 2024. Today I read another article about the use of political intimidation as a threat to our fragile fabric of democracy, and it was coming from the Wisconsin chief judge of the Wisconsin Supreme Court, right after she struck down a political gerrymandering map of Wisconsin, which would allow Republicans to retain control of a blue state, which the idea was not, of course, to stop the Republicans from having control of a blue state, but to have Democrats have control of a red state. That's been the goal. That's been the goal of flipping the Supreme Court of Wisconsin for some time. Strike down the maps the Republicans have drawn, which have allowed the Republicans to unlawfully and illegally and racistly retain power. We're seeing that battle play out in other states as well. But the judge has suggested that people are now making credible threats to judges, as if politicians and judges have never been threatened in American history. There's never been any history anyone can point to about public persons disappointing the public and being punished for it politically or even physically. That's not a thing. I mean, tar and feathering has never happened. Public shame and humiliation of elected officials or appointed officials has never been a thing. Threats of violence, both real and unreal, they've never been like this, right? Nothing has ever happened like this. This is all new. It's all new. And it harkens back to a time when our country would fracture and separate the evil from the good. And of course, the elected officials are always the good. And the fragile fabric of our democracy hangs in the balance every single time. The democracy, the democracy, the democracy. And I've got an article for you today about three sentences from Abraham Lincoln's second inaugural address, which should go to tell the evil right-wing extremists just what it means, just what a threat to our fragile democracy they are, and just how close the democracy was to failing in the Civil War. Yes, the democracy of the Civil War. Let the inadequate knowledge of that statement alone sink in when you realize that these are professors talking very seriously and being taken very seriously by media outlets about threats to our nation prior to the ratification of the 14th Amendment, prior to the end of the Civil War, talking about a democracy in crisis. I can tell you we do not live in a democracy now, and we lived so much farther from a democracy in the 1860s that the statements are ludicrous. And yet, repeated ad nauseum, repeated as a mantra, repeated as a propaganda to lead the unwitting, the uneducated, and the unaged down a path of servitude. Servitude towards the idea of democratically elected Democrats running a democratically organized country of a near direct democracy, a representative democracy. Where the decisions of the day are put to a public opinion test. Where the leaders of the day are voted only by public opinion, and whereby the popular vote of the entire nation should trump, of course, any idea of a weighted value between a union of states. The abolition of state lines would be the most beneficial thing that could happen here. Why are we a union of sovereign states when we should just be a union of one nation? A nation run by democracy, pure popularism. There's no diversity amongst the geographic spread of this nation. There is just America, right? We are just Americans. There's no such thing as a Californian, an Idahoan, a Utahan. That's not real. There's just America, right? No Texans, no Floridians, nothing. We're all one people, homogenous, unified in thought, unified in purpose, unified in everything, except with these little dividing lines that shouldn't matter anymore. That's the country they want to sell. That's the goal they want to have. I mean, sure, they'll keep the dividing lines so politicians can have their little spaces, have their little audiences and their pet set up set of rules to pander to rail against as convenient for themselves. But they have nothing to offer as to why those states matter other than a radical self-interest in their own political success. In locals, someone asked, what is the end game? The real end game. The real end game is a country run by a democracy with leaders pretending to care about the will of the masses. A democracy that they know will skew heavily in one direction as they pack cities, make lives miserable, tell people the lives of the city is great, tell people that 5-minute city utopia where you don't need a car, you don't need any of these personal possessions. You can walk anywhere 5 minutes to get any necessity and almost any want. And if you just can't get it in your 5-minute section of the city, well, there's a public bus or a light rail to take you in extreme comfort to the next 5-minute city where you can get it and be returned in only 10 minutes. And why would you want anything other than that? And yet when people get close, when that density reaches a critical mass, we find something to be true. As you pile people upon people, you pile problems upon problems, and you generate crime. You generate crime that can be used as justification for damn near any policy, any political position, no matter how extreme, will be justified with enough discomfort of the masses. And by God, a 5-minute city with a population density exceeding South Korea's, with a culture that resembles America, doesn't sound like any sort of pleasant utopia to me. And yet, that is the end goal. That is the end game. Make no mistake, a pure democratic system will elect pure Democrats or Democrat diet for the rest of eternity, because the problems of the country will fade. The problems of the city will take predominance. People will lose their ability to live away from cities and be ushered into more and more dense urban centers. And those urban centers will control policy across the one country, not the 50 states. And once that happens, a solidity and unity of political power will prevail. And it will persist until the country collapses. And so, with that, I would like to go ahead and explore what I feel is an indication of how 2024 is going to go, how this political commentary around this subject is going to develop as the year goes on and as the election starts, what their plan of attack is for the general election. And the plan of attack, again, seems pretty clear. Donald Trump is going to win the primary, no matter how many ballots they try and keep him off. He will be the Republican nominee. And then the vilification will start in earnest. Not only is Donald Trump an insurrectionist, Colorado's already set it up. Maine's already set it up. The media's been thinking it forever, basically saying it. And now they'll get to. He's an insurrectionist. How can you elect him? How can anyone elect an insurrectionist? They must be an insurrectionist by extension. They must want this country to be run by some unseen fiction. Of course they do. Otherwise, they would make the sensible choice and elect Joe Biden or nominate, I don't know, Mitt Romney or something. Chris Christie, the reasonable Republican, right? Not that Donald Trump. And of course, they'll point to the few examples of extremism. Saying that there are none would be dishonest. There's extremism in general, right wing, left wing, whatever. Of course, you have extremes. You have the fringe of any subject. And those extremes will be cherry picked on one side, ignored on the others. They'll ignore 2020. They'll ignore Black Lives Matter. They'll ignore Antifa. They'll ignore that. Where have they been? Where's Black Lives Matter and Antifa been? Do you guys notice they're just not very prominent lately? Isn't that weird? Where did they go? Quiet through the election. We'll see how the Republicans are doing. We'll see how Donald Trump is doing, later in the year. It might just have to show back up. But for now, that constant unrest from Antifa and BLM that we got so accustomed to just vanished. But it'll crop back up if necessary. And it's amazing to watch this happen. But that's what we're going to be talking about today. Thanks for listening to my TED Talk. Breck says, if I recall correctly, one of the BLM co-founders in jail stole money, another fled to Canada and bought mansions, plural. Oh, yeah. But listen, BLM was always a bottom-up organization, not just because they twerk a lot, but because it's not organized and structured in a top-down way. A chapter of Black Lives Matter, maybe the main chapter, the founding chapter, certainly faced legal problems, but it was always set up in cells, right? Like the Siege. I'll compare them to terrorists. We can both do this. It was never necessary to have an overarching BLM structure. In fact, it was a detriment to the cause and concept of BLM and Antifa. If you have an organization to attack an actual entity, then you can attack it. You can stop the tide. You can do something about it. But if it's infinity organizations that are all pointless and throwaway, working in concert, not by design, but by default of purpose, then you never need an organizational structure that can come under attack. There is no leader to dethrone because there's no one directing anything. The direction comes from the mission, and the mission is simplistically clear. Disrupt, create unrest based on any perceived slight. Any perceived slight within some realm of constrained social construct. BLM, Black Lives Matter, any issue that could conceivably impact Black lives in some way is fair game for BLM. Anything out of that gets a little beyond the purpose. Antifa, anything that can be labeled fascism in any concept becomes a subject. There's tons of overlap between those things. And the biggest overlap is that they're all a fiction. They're a fiction created to use a narrative to justify action. And that action is violence, often that action would be called insurrection if it was done by the right. So we're going to explore that through some articles. We may get to some other subjects. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. But yeah, that's what we got. One second. That's what we've got on the menu today. Now, we have a bunch of super chats that came in really quickly here. So I'm going to hit those, and then we'll get into the flow of the regular show. And, well, the flow of this show. It's not really a regular show. This is a more philosophical show, not as segregated into, segments as I have been doing lately. But, hey, it's the type of show that I do from time to time. And so we gotta do that. No tattoo on the forehead? No, my tattoo is on my arm. And well, I do have to share something with you. I got completely obliterated, guys. I got completely obliterated and owned, and I've got to show you how that happened because I don't know how I'm ever going to recover. But it made me smile very heavily. Cheesy Boy says, Tim Pool has a Des Moines event with Vivek Ramaswamy tomorrow. I got tickets for me and my lady. Anything funny I should do or say? Oh, that's cool. Just yell at some point Tim Pool plays guitar for his chickens. Think that'd be great. Oh, that would have been fun. Des Moines isn't too far from me, but I can't go tomorrow. That'd have been great. That would have been fun to go crash. That would be fun to go crash. But here we go. Stonebleed says, Nate, you are now so late and gay that you're tardy and trans. Well, yes, true. Ellie Fan says, Nose, apparently you have been nominated as Lolcow of the Year by Kiwi Farms. Wrong. I think you addressed this in the next one. I won. And I won handily. Not even close. Lean into it and give us an acceptance speech. Make it funny or you get tomatoed. Also, Kiwi Farms, why are you gay? Well, I don't think you can give an acceptance speech. I'll just give a victory speech. And the victory was, I won without even trying. Take that. Everybody else is going to have to up their fucking game. She says, my bad. Apparently you won Lolcow of the Year. Oops and congrats. Thank you. Go for Big Guy. Says, we are being set up rackets. There will be one or perhaps several real mass casualty events that they will blame on the right. Well, they already do. They will try and round us up and get the civil war the deep state yearns for. Well, yeah, of course. Cars in Depth, what do you think of Musk going after administrative law judges at SEC and now NLRB is unconstitutional? If he wins, that'd be a big blow to the deep state. I think he's fighting a fight that he won't win. I hope he does, though. It'd be great. The National Labor Relations Board is the one thing that makes unions unacceptable. Unions are a product of basic economics. Combine effort, combine unity of purpose, and increase your power. Unions are not a problem in the market except when they're given authority of law by the government. Once unions are given the ability to enforce by law their demands, then they no longer have value in any sort of acceptable market economy. They become a de facto agent of the government. And it's funny how much money goes towards the governmental entities that support them through those union dues that they collect from people who are under the auspices of the union, whether they're in it or not. So unions are not automatically a cancer, but when unions are given the force of law, they are. Seeing the National Labor Relations Board dissolved as unconstitutional would be great. Going after the SEC would be fantastic. And the basic claim that Musk has, maybe I should talk about this a little bit more on another show. The basic claim that Musk has is that in both of these cases, an administrative process is where the accuser becomes the judge. So the accuser at the SEC or NLRB becomes the judge who oversees the case, and they're not accountable to anybody because the president is not able, even the president of the United States is not able to replace or remove these judges, except for extremely gross misconduct, which there's no such thing as gross misconduct when you're just issuing rulings that people don't like. Jeremiah's Dick fits well. Oh, so wait, so he's saying that violates the right to a jury trial and due process and all of that stuff, which he's right, but I just don't think he'll win. I hope he does. Jeremiah's Dick fits well says, been away a few weeks. Remember the banality of evil. Okay. Me04120 says, requesting a toast for a friend Michael who took a trip to Greenland on Saturday. He was 30. Prayers for those dealing with tough times this year. All right, here we go. To Michael, 30 years old and making a crucial and impactful decision that life is no longer worth the hurt, the pressure, and the struggle. Leaving behind friends, family, whoever he encountered, reeling from that decision, wondering what they could have done. The answer, of course, is nothing. There's nothing you could have done. If there was something you could have done, you obviously would have. But Michael made that choice. You did not. So remember him for the times that he didn't, and forgive him for the one time he did. Cheers. Faceless Man says, have you ever heard of the prosecution lying to limit a defendant on what evidence he can present? Yes. I read an article the other day where Jack Smith was trying to do that. Isn't that unconstitutional? It is unconstitutional for a prosecutor to lie in the course of a court proceeding, yes, especially to deprive someone of a right. It is unconstitutional, but who's going to stop him? Who's going to prosecute him for his bad act? Jack Smith? Sure. Bad Dragonite. Hey, Nick, think I can get a channel shout out? I'm at the edge of monetizing just under 800 subs. I do video game and anime related remixes. Obviously, people need a soundtrack for the Civil War, and I'm here to provide it. All right, guys, go check out Bad Dragonite on YouTube. If you're into video game and anime related remixes, go get your soundtrack for the Boogaloo coming to you. Darth Kitty Cat, why use Antifa or BLM with Palestinian protests and Miami aliens are working so well? Don't worry. It's just placeholder names, right? But even so, the Palestinian protests, Miami aliens, they're not having the same impact as 2020, but that's because 2020 was the election year. 2024 is coming up. Prepare for the onslaught wherever it goes. Logan Darklighter says, when hearing the words our democracy from a Democrat, replace those words with our power and their intentions begin to make so much more sense. I agree with that. Johnny Duck 311, what do you call a tree full of vaginas? Answer, a country. Nice. Malkarian, not trying to start drama. Camelot was blocked by Flash. Were you? I was not. Camelot was also unblocked by Flash. My understanding is that was a misunderstanding. I know there's a bunch of drama going on out there. I'm going to say it a million times, I'm sure. I am not involved. I got nothing to say about it. Everyone I've heard of who's involved in that is all still cool with me. I'm not blocked. I talked to Flash today just to make sure everything was cool. He said we were all good. We just hadn't really talked in a little while due to logistics of life and being busy. So we're all good. He and Camelot are all good now. I think that was just a mix-up that happened there. I'm not going to comment about what everybody else is up to in that mess because I don't know. I don't even want to know. I don't want to know the sides. I don't want to know the fucking factions and the splits or the reasons. Leave me alone. Leave me alone. Leave me alone. Leave me alone. I don't want it. I don't want it. I don't want it. I don't want it. Oh my God. Last time anything like this happened, it was, it did not go great. I try to stay away. Oh my goodness. Okay, we've got a couple on locals here to hit. Fire PA, can I get a toast? Yesterday was my birthday, just turned 34. Just enjoyed a fun day with the family and just appreciate that time more and more these days. Fire PA, cheers to you. Happy birthday, brother. 34 years old, slowly progressing towards that magical fuzzy line where suddenly people care about what you do and say in a positive way rather than just a negative one. All men go through it at some point. May it bless you sooner rather than later. And I love to hear about the chill, muted birthday with the people who matter most to you. Learn to continue appreciating those. They're ever more valuable with every day that passes. Cheers to you. FSPU 19 says, preach. Member of a union that has no power. Stupid FAA. Great meeting you in Nashville. Thanks for signing the baseball. Hey, you're welcome, man. My pleasure. And was there another one here? No. Okay, perfect. Think we're about set. But first, I have to tell people about how I was owned. How I was owned today. Well, yesterday. I don't know if it was yesterday or today, but let's see. Open that. So I did talk about having a tattoo. I got a new tattoo over the weekend at a tattoo convention, and I showed it yesterday on my local stream, just right at the very end, and someone was mocking me very effectively. It was great, and they asked the AI to draw me. They asked them to draw a skinny lawyer, I guess, with a snake tattoo and a red nose from drinking alcohol. Is that what it says? It says a skinny guy with a snake tattoo on his arm and a red nose to symbolize alcoholism. So obviously the AI came out and just wrecked me. So here we go. Here's fuck. I've been destroyed. I've been destroyed by the accuracy of this picture. It's absolutely awful. No. Oh no. They have it. They have me down and I don't know what to do. I've been exposed. Oh no. Oh shit. So I've been just torched. I don't know how I will live with myself, but I will strongly consider all of my past mistakes. Talking Trash the Truth says, drama on the internet. Surely you jest. That never happens. Have a great show, Pope. It's time for Bonzo, aka me. Bedtime for Bonzo, aka me. Love ya. Hey, good night, Talking Trash the Truth. Hope you have a good one. Last night on the following program says, yo, Nick, making Good Logic shorts because Joe can't. Let's get him to 100K. Can the law Pope decree that all shall check him out? Well, absolutely. Everyone should check out Joe Good Logic shorts. I mean, I can't think of anywhere else people would want to check other than Good Logic shorts. And I firmly endorse the push towards everyone looking at Good Logic shorts. Travis says, the same law firm that Elon Musk beat the SEC's funding secured $420 taking Twitter private are now hired by Richard Hart. Okay. Cool. All right. Oh my gosh. The internet is just, it's something else, guys. It's something fucking else. Brave New Doors. What are your opinions on fighting homeowners associations? I'm currently fighting with my HOA board because they want to lower the rental threshold from 25% to 15% and are holding a vote with no end date. It all depends on the bylaws. Homeowners associations operate on the law of contract. And so you do, by participating in the association and having, by purchasing a home there, you agree to the existing contract as part of the purchase, you pay the dues, and then as the homeowners association grows and progresses and changes as long as they follow the bylaws that are the processes that are generated in the contract, which generally are referenced in the bylaws. As long as they're actually following that process, those contracts remain binding so long as you live there. So fighting them, you have to typically find where they breach the contract, and you can hold them to something, or they violate the procedure that's out there. But you have the freedom of contract, and HOAs exploit that to the maximum. I would strongly recommend never being in an HOA. They're awful. Okay. Problem is sometimes they have the greatest sort of places to be. All right. Let me see. Where do we start? I think we're going to start with this CNN Politics article. The CNN Politics article about 3 sentences from Abraham Lincoln to explain the Civil War to 2024 GOP candidates. Because they're just too stupid, right? They just don't understand the Civil War. So let's go ahead and get into that explanation of the Civil War from CNN and their analysts. I'm sure it will be valuable. James Michael Doyle says, it's been far too long since I caught a live stream of yours. Working nonstop sucks. Hope your liver isn't Swiss cheese yet. No, it's great. That's the fun thing about life. I am probably healthier now than ever. So that's cool. The Duke says, on the topic of Civil War, anyone calling for it doesn't understand or care what that actually means. Add to that the fact that one side of that conflict has all of the guns, and I wouldn't be so hasty on that. I know that's a popular sentiment, but I'm not quite sure it's as true as people want it to be. Here we go. So 3 sentences from Abraham Lincoln to explain the Civil War to 2024 GOP candidates. Now the 3 sentences are way down here, but we're going to read the article. I think it's important because you got to know where they're coming from. 163 years after multiple Southern states seceded from the Union rather than accept a new president who was hostile to slavery, the origin of the Civil War is looming over another presidential election. What are we fucking talking about here? The country is again contending with how to remember its original sin and with white supremacy, which remains a threat today. On Monday, President Joe Biden compared Trump supporters who won't accept the outcome of the 2020 presidential election with former Confederates who embraced the lost cause view of the Civil War, which saw the war from the perspective of white Southerners and sidestepped the issue of slavery. Now, that's interesting because Joe Biden would have been one of those. Joe Biden absolutely, though he was not alive at the time of the Civil War, was alive throughout the civil rights movement and firmly opposed it, which is fantastic. And the statements he has surrounding it are absolutely vile. But for him to bring this up is pretty funny. He didn't write this. This isn't something he created or came up with. This was a speechwriter inserting the lost cause view into a Biden speech that he read from a teleprompter. Quote, "Now we're living in an era of a second lost cause," Biden said. Once again, there's something because we're trying to turn a loss into a lie which, if allowed to live, will once again bring terrible damage to this country. This time the lie is about the 2020 election. The lunacy of that comparison is crazy. Absolutely crazy, but okay. This 2024 focus on Civil War started when former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, no, this is not true at all, by the way, whose state was the first to secede before Abraham Lincoln's inauguration all those years ago, failed last month to list slavery as a cause of the war during an appearance in New Hampshire as she seeks a GOP presidential nomination. So it all started with Nikki Haley, except it didn't. It started with a question from someone to Nikki Haley, which had nothing to do with anything related to the 2020 elections. Kind of wondering if that was a plant, right? Like the whole Nikki Haley thing seems really convenient. Like, who's bringing up the cause of the Civil War in a 2020 presidential primary candidate speech? It's very strange, but okay. She later recalibrated her response to make clear, of course, the Civil War was about slavery, but also about individual freedoms. Nope. An issue that motivates Republican primary voters. I don't know if Nikki Haley's dumb or just retarded on this issue, but the Civil War is about the northern states breaking the social compact that is the Constitution, and the southern states not liking that. Now, the issue they were breaking it over most frequently happened to be the Civil War. It did happen to be that, or it happened to be slavery. That was the issue that was in contention. But that was an issue that uniquely affected southern states and was uniquely not being honored by the northern states. You can say that that's immoral or about slavery or whatever all you want. That's fine. But the northern states violated the Constitution against the southern states, and the southern states petitioned for redress and were rebuffed. They thought, well, this isn't fair. We are abiding by the law. They are not. We're required to uphold our end. Our political power is limited by the 3/5 compromise. Our political power is limited in all sorts of ways so that we don't dominate the North. And man, did they want to. They were abiding by their agreements. The North was not. Now, if you want to call that about slavery, because slavery is the agreement over which there was a problem, sure. Not really slavery, though. It wasn't abolition. It wasn't the abolition of slavery that was the issue. It was the North not wanting to return slaves at the North's expense to the South when slaves escaped. But that was in the Constitution. As horrific as that sounds, it was there. So North didn't want to do that. Even though they agreed to, they didn't want to. South said, well, fine. What do we need you for? But the North wasn't calling for the abolition of slavery, and the South saying, no, we're going to go to war for it. What? That didn't happen. That's not why secession occurred. It's easy to make it out that way. The North wasn't this rosy place for the Africans to live in peace and harmony with everybody else. The North was terribly racist. It was the 1800s. Like you're not finding some mild-mannered, sensical people without an ounce of racism in their body. Not that that exists. It's just you certainly didn't have it then. Death Trout says, yesterday was my birthday. Here's to another year staying alive despite your enemies. Get it, brother. Jason of TGA. Isn't it funny that they manufacture a left and right, then act all surprised when both implode on themselves, and somehow all the gold and uranium is still missing? Not Alfarius, a CNN take on history. I'm sure this will be as accurate as when they claimed World War I was caused by nationalism for some reason right after Trump described himself as a nationalist. Strange. And Jim Satalis says, I'm tired of all these lies. The last state to free their slaves was New Jersey. Didn't release its slaves until December 18th, 1865, when the 13th Amendment was ratified. It was a Union state. Slavery was ended to punish the South. Yes. Yes, it was. So anyway, let's keep going. Haley should know how the Confederacy and racism echo still in the U.S. Yes, the Confederacy and racism, they echo strongly in the U.S., of course. The Joker says the state's main reason for seceding was Lincoln's election, who they cited as being a strong abolitionist. Well, there you go. There you go. That's that. Cool. Haley should know how the Confederacy and racism echoes still in the U.S. She was a Republican governor who removed the Confederate battle flag from the South Carolina State House grounds after a mass shooting at Mother Emanuel AME Church in Charleston, 2015. Notably, it's from the pulpit at that church that Biden spoke Monday about the poison of white supremacy in current American society. Over the weekend, former President Donald Trump, the current frontrunner in the GOP race and a northerner who now resides in the southern state of Florida. Listen to how this is written. Listen to how this is written. He's a northerner turned southerner. That's so fucking amazing. She said he can't understand why the Civil War wasn't negotiated rather than fought. He either forgot or does not know that the issue of slavery was the subject of multiple compromises in the decades leading up to the Civil War. Yeah, the South really liked those compromises, I'm sure. Compromise through political power. And again, those compromises ended up with the Constitution not being honored in favor of the North at the expense of the South. Plus, he argued that Lincoln, the father of the Republican Party, is only known today because of the war. There's probably something to that. But I mean, it's a good question, right? Why wasn't the Civil War negotiated rather than fought? I think it was England had a bloodless abolition, right? Protest, advocacy, and then eventually abolition. Why wasn't it negotiated? Who knows? Who knows? Because they didn't want to, mostly. But Trump believes he can negotiate damn near anything, and he's got a decent track record at it. If he negotiated it, you probably wouldn't even know who Abraham Lincoln was, Trump said, robbing the first Republican president of credit for the most important presidential act in U.S. history, emancipating the enslaved. I mean, he didn't, though. The Emancipation Proclamation only covered the Confederate States. It exempted the 4 border states that had slavery. Like, this is silly. It's complete revision of history. The Emancipation Proclamation was a way that if they were able to grab or rescue or whatever slaves from southern states, they were considered freed men. The Constitution, which still said they had to be returned, was not to be honored, and they could be conscripted into the Union Army as freedmen, and were. And there's reasons for the Emancipation Proclamation beyond the altruistic and benevolent means of ending slavery, which it didn't even do. A third Republican presidential candidate, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, has criticized his party rivals for their comment. Lincoln ended up ushering in the abolition of slavery, and he saved the Union, DeSantis told ABC News on Sunday. But it should not fade from anyone's memory that a year ago, DeSantis caused his own controversy by rejecting a new advanced placement African-American studies course that he felt was biased. The Florida Board of Education also caused an uproar last year when it approved a new set of standards for how Black history should be taught in the state's public schools based on an interpretation of a law DeSantis signed. Quote, DeSantis has used his fight against wokeness to boost his national profile amid a national discussion of how racism and history should be taught in schools, CNN reported at the time. The Joker has followed up with, they cited both the Fugitive Slave Act and Lincoln's election multiple times. Yeah, I hear you, man. I hear you. DeSantis should know something about the origins of the Civil War since he taught high school history at a private school in Georgia early in his career. Okay. The New York Times reported in 2022 about his time at the school and interviewed students who said his views on the Civil War at the time were included in a parody video made by students. Last of Yahoo says, it's okay, buddy. Just a bunch of narcissists that can't fathom how you can disagree with their truths, you bigot. Hailing from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, the Northern South will rise again. From the Times report, the video, which was reviewed by the Times, includes a short snippet in which a voice purporting to be Mr. DeSantis is heard saying the Civil War was not about slavery. It was about 2 competing economic systems. One was in the North, While a student dozes in class, a student voiced the role of Mr. DeSantis. So, I mean, they nailed it with a parody video. Got it. For just a second, can we appreciate for just a second, can we appreciate the fact that CNN is breathlessly reporting that Ron DeSantis doesn't understand the war because of a parody video that was made and reviewed by the New York Times, in which students interpreted him as saying it wasn't about slavery, it was about two competing economic systems. One was in the North, the suggestion being the other would be slavery. Okay, there we go. That's the strong thing. The Joker says Razor Fist said they seceded over tariffs. I like Razor Fist. Very cool. Very, very cool. And then he says Razor Fist video on Lincoln is absolute garbage. Not a Razor Fist fan. The Joker is not a Razor Fist fan, or at least not of his opinions on Lincoln. Dickington Post says, is conscription anything but slavery? Justified slavery in service of the country. Trump has also expressed frustration about the shift in how the public views the Civil War, and during his presidency complained about efforts to remove statues that commemorated figures of the Confederacy like General Robert E. Lee. Yeah. How Lincoln described the war. This will be good, I'm guessing. I talked to two Civil War historians about this new modern focus on the war between the states, and both argued, have you guys noticed a modern focus on the war between the states? I mean, I've only seen it coming from the media and the Democrats specifically, but okay. Both argued it's important to understand what happened in that moment when American democracy nearly ended. And since they both talked about American democracy, I can immediately distrust them. Okay, that's my humble opinion, but let's see what they say. There are more important things than dumping on politicians for not knowing history, according to Adam Rothman, a history professor at Georgetown University and founding director of the school's Center for the Study of Slavery and Its Legacies. Quote, I do hope that it might cause some people to look a little bit deeper, to do the reading, to try to understand not just what the Civil War was about, but what some of the different plausible interpretations are, Rothman said, because historians debate this stuff. When I asked Rothman for one thing everyone should read, he pointed me not to a long book or an academic paper, but rather Lincoln's second inaugural address. Delivered after his unexpected reelection and shortly before the end of the Civil War, it is universally regarded as one of the most powerful one of the most important speeches in U.S. history. Read the entire thing. It's just over 700 words. Maybe we'll read it in a minute. Short enough to fit on a wall at the Lincoln Memorial, and which my editor will tell you is substantially shorter than this story you're reading. In it, Lincoln argues the war was God's answer to the sin of slavery, proof both of why the war was fought and that it was ultimately unavoidable. Here are three key sentences from the speech. Okay. All right. These are quotes from Lincoln. If we shall suppose that American slavery is one of those offenses which in the providence of God must needs come, but which having continued through his appointed time, he now wills to remove, and that he gives to both North and South this terrible war as the woe due to those by whom the offense came, shall we discern therein any departure from those divine attributes which the believers in a living God always ascribe him? Fondly do we hope, fervently do we pray, that this mighty scourge of war may speedily pass away. Yet, if God wills that it continue until all the wealth piled by the bondsman's 250 years of unrequited toil shall be sunk, and until every drop of blood drawn with the lash shall be paid by another drawn with the sword, as was said 3,000 years ago, so still it must be said, quote, the judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. Now remember what they just said about that. They say in it, Lincoln argues the war was God's answer to the sin of slavery, proof both of why the war was fought and that it was ultimately unavoidable. Now, I'm sorry, but if that is the conclusion you draw from those three cherry-picked lines of Lincoln's second inaugural address, you misunderstand not only what Lincoln said, but you misunderstand the context in which it was said, and you specifically misunderstand the history of slavery and God as professed in the Bible itself. Humble suggestion that a brief read of the Old Testament will question the very notion of slavery as a sin, and a mild perusing of the New Testament, specifically Romans, will question the very idea of slavery needing abolition in the face of a God, his grace, and Jesus' sacrifice for all. Neither the Old Testament writers nor Paul himself advocate for abolition. In fact, Paul's admonishment to the church in Rome, to the Romans specifically, is to avoid the idea of liberation from slavery, because Christ has brought liberation to every individual through his sacrifice, and that the more important purpose than advocating for the freedom of slaves would be for slaves to obey their masters so that their masters might find salvation by the slave's model. To suggest the sin of slavery as one of biblical interpretation is a stretch. To suggest that Lincoln was unfamiliar with these texts is a much bigger stretch than to suggest that a fucking CNN politics opinion piece writer has no goddamn clue what they're talking about in regards to what the Bible says about slavery. I can guarantee you that Lincoln's absolute obsession with the Exodus, the Moses story, would far outweigh this CNN politics writer's knowledge on the subject. But hey, who am I? Who am I? Jason of TGA says, as a non-U.S. person reading history, what grabbed my attention was Washington refusing the title of king offered by the Prussian puppet masters. I suspect we find out who the puppet masters are soon. Let's see. Here we go. All right. Back to this. If you draw, again, from these comments that the Civil War is unavoidable and is restitution for the sin of slavery, I just don't know what to tell you. And again, in history, there are bloodless abolitions. I believe England being the most popularly known one. The question of why a war needed to be fought is a valid question. It's not saying one didn't need to be fought, but the idea that it was inevitable because Lincoln said something to the effect of maybe God ushered it in, and at the time God wanted it out, we would have to pay for it in blood, doesn't make it actually inevitable. And ignoring the context as an inaugural speech, winning re-election in the midst of a war that he was looking to end and a union he was looking to preserve, ignoring that context is critical. I also talked to Carolyn Janney, a Civil War expert and history professor at the University of Virginia, about why it's important to keep facts straight, in particular on the Civil War as the country enters a contentious election year. The Civil War, quote, was absolutely the moment when democracy broke down in this country, she said, adding, there's a lot of hyperbole about where we are as a fractured nation and where we stand with the fragility of democracy. I don't know how else to explain that at a time when effectively only white men were allowed a shot at the vote, we don't have anything even approaching a democracy. Like, I don't know how to further question this person's understanding of what the United States was during the time of the Civil War. Like, clearly it's a republic. It's not democratic. It is not in any way operating in a democratic fashion, and it's not operating as a unified country. The entire purpose of the 14th Amendment and Reconstruction was to solidify the union of the states, similarly to how the Union of States had to be solidified after the Articles of Confederation were not sufficient. Increasing federal power over the states became the method by which they would preserve the Union itself. Eroding the allegiance specifically to one's state heritage and expressing a more unified national jingoism effectively was the goal, because they did not want this to fracture again. We were not a democracy. We were a representative republic of several states, several sovereign states, operating in concert and under contractual agreement. It frustrates my ability to listen to this person about keeping the facts of the Civil War straight when they don't know the facts of our country. They don't know the facts of the government they're talking about. Can they even know what impact was slavery or abolition or Abraham Lincoln or any of these negotiated compromises were having if they don't understand the basic structure of how the country operated? The fact of the Civil War is that states seceded because they didn't like the results of an election. Quote, I'm not trying to be waving my hands like some crazy historian, but I think we take for granted that our democracy will always be intact. And the Civil War was a moment when it wasn't, she said. Now, I have some thoughts about this. Obviously, I've been sharing them as we go. But I have some thoughts about this. Specifically, this is going to be hard to hear because I am not a fan of the idea of a divided United States in the 1860s or now. All right? I'm not a proponent of the division between North and South, or now the division between right and left, or whatever narrative that may be. But the secession of states over an unaddressed violation of the social compact of the Constitution, the secession of states, and the subsequent fight to bring that in and resolve the dispute, which would eventually become a war over the process by which states join and leave the Union, was maybe the purest expression of a constitutional republic that could exist prior to Reconstruction. It's a weird statement to say. The war was found to be, the secession was found to be illegal after the fact because the North won and the necessity of illegality became paramount to not paying compensation for the property, aka slaves, that were removed from Southern private ownership, and also to forego the debts incurred by the Confederacy and to force the South to pay for the Northern debts. The finding of secession to be illegal was required for the country to move on in the way it did. But had the South won, secession would not have been illegal. It would have been seen as a broken contract, to which parties of the contract who were not satisfied were able to call for breach, allow for the possibility of rectification, and when that did not come, leave the contract. And they did so through the use of their representative governments. They did so by deciding as individual sovereigns to leave a contract that they felt was not being honored. You can debate as to why all day. You can say what you want. I'm not saying that that's the right outcome or the moral outcome or the desired outcome. As I stated, preserving the Union, I think, is more important in the scope of history. And I do not know what a divided United States into a Northern Union and a Southern Confederacy over the long term would look like. But I think we would have a less stable country in the long run, or less stable pair of countries in the long run, than what we ended up with as a single union. I think that we would have potentially eroded into war and conflict. Who knows what the expansion west would have ended up looking like? Who knows how the growth of the states would go if that had occurred? But what happened, happened. But to suggest that it was an eroding of democracy is weird, because it was an expression specifically of a republic and a republican form of government. To say that states who found themselves not agreeing with the contract that they had agreed, not enjoying the benefits of the contract that was agreed to by all parties, made the decision on their own to leave. That is representative government in a republican system of sovereigns that are united. The uncomfortable realities of law and politics are uncomfortable realities because they challenge the notion of our peaceful enjoyment of what we have. I talked about this with Destiny. I talked about this briefly with Adam and Sitch. We all want everything to go well. We all want to think that our lives are this ball of comfort and convenience that will perpetuate ad infinitum, but they don't. And when they don't, it's not always because the system broke down. Sometimes it's because the system worked all too well. So to suggest that this was the breakdown, the fraying of our fragile democracy, well, we don't have a democracy to be fragile. But in any case, it wasn't the breakdown of the system of government. It was the represented outcome of a system of government that allows sovereigns to make their own decisions. And then they did. The fact that other members of the sovereignty didn't, or other sovereign members didn't like that decision, because what would they lose? The massive economic power of the South that they had been enjoying for so long. They would lose that. They would lose access to national resources. They would create a hostile southern border that they didn't have. They would be cut off from southern port cities. They would be cut off from access to Mexico as a trade partner. They would potentially be cut off from the West in the long run. The fact that they didn't like it, fought to preserve it, is another expression of a republican form of government in which sovereigns banded together to act to preserve a union that was fraying. It's not the fraying of democracy. It's an expression of the republic that was created, the republic for which all of this stands. While they say it was the weakest time, I think in ways it was the strongest. And then what happened next was a reformat, a reimagining, and a new understanding of what the Union would be going forward. Reconstruction is reconstruction because it built the country back into something different than what it was. But we can't look at the Civil War as an expression of the country after Reconstruction. We have to look at it as an expression beforehand. And we were certainly much farther from democracy then than we are now. And democracy didn't fray. So, with that, that's my analysis and refutation of this stupid article from CNN. We're about to flip over to Rumble, and then we will continue the show. We will go into more of this subject from a different approach, not talking about the Civil War specifically, but in some references, and then we'll see where we go from there. If you're on YouTube, we have another super chat to do, but I've been keeping up with them as we go. Feel free to pop over to the Rumble show. The link is in the description, also in the pinned chat by C. Goody. Don't feel dirty just because Goody posted it. You still can click on it. We will have a short break, the Rumble stinger as we transition over and become Trans Rumble will happen. But then we will have a short bathroom break for me, because that's how life goes these days. And then we will come back and finish out the show over there. So if you watch on YouTube only, thank you. See you tomorrow. If you want to follow us over to Rumble, please click like on the YouTube video if you enjoy this type of content, enjoy this type of more philosophical approach to content and stuff like that. Click like, it really helps. And also on Rumble, of course, you should click like every time. And if you're not liking it, why are you here? Here we go. Ellie Fan says, can we get a count on how many times that dummy said that we are democracy? Also, constitutional republic, bitches, not a democracy. Exactly. We are a constitutional republic. We always have been. We are a different one after the Civil War and the Reconstruction. We definitely are a different constitutional republic, but we still are. So with that, let's move over to Rumble. I will see you guys there, or I will see you tomorrow on YouTube and Rumble again. The Joker says, at Ryan the Editor, those same Democrats defending slavery complained about tariffs. That is the last one of the show. See you on Rumble. Peace. Peace.